The arrival of doom. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, dark and silent. Stars flickered in the distance like tiny candles, but tonight something moved among them. Something huge, something powerful. Captain Valen of the Xelorian scout fleet sat in his command chair, his yellow eyes focused on the sensor screen. His ship, the Vectra, floated on the edge of the Grath Empire's borders, watching for any enemy movements. The Xelorians had always feared the Grath, the most powerful alien empire in the galaxy. But tonight, the real fear came from somewhere else. "Commander," a young officer said, his voice shaking, "we have detected something." Valen frowned. "Define something." The officer gulped. "An unidentified object just entered this sector. It's moving, impossibly fast." Valen leaned forward. The screen showed a strange shape, a massive object, larger than any warship ever recorded. It wasn't just moving fast, it was tearing through space like a predator on the hunt. Then the distress signals began. One after another, outposts on the edge of the Grath Empire screamed for help. "Unknown enemy. We are under attack." No weapon is working. Nothing is stopping it. By the stars, it's a human warship. Valen's blood ran cold. Humans. For centuries, humanity had been the underdog of the galaxy. Weak. Primitive. Their early colonies had been crushed by the Grath Empire, their fleets scattered like dust. But they had disappeared after that. No one knew where they went. No one cared. But now, they had returned. And they had built a monster. The Vectra's main screen flickered, showing a distant video feed from a burning Grath outpost. Valen's crew watched in horror. A single warship, black as the void, hovered above the battlefield. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, shifting and changing, as if it was alive. Energy blasts struck it but did nothing. Plasma cannons fired at full power but barely scratched its hull. Then the warship fired back. A beam of pure white light erupted from its main cannon, cutting through an entire Grath battleship like it was made of paper. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space, but the horror was clear. One shot. One kill. Valen's crew gasped. This wasn't just a ship. This was a force of nature. "Captain," the officer whispered, "should we leave?" Valen hesitated. He was a warrior, trained for battle. He had fought countless enemies. But this was different. His instincts screamed at him to run. "Prepare an emergency jump," he ordered. "We must report this to the High Council." But before the crew could move, a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the ship, not through the speakers, not through the walls. It vibrated in their bones, as if space itself was groaning under a terrible weight. Then the sensors went dark. The screen flickered. A single message appeared, written in a strange alien script. But Valen understood it instantly. "We have returned." And then the Titanfall, humanity's ultimate warship, turned toward them. The Titan awakens. The silence inside the Vectra was heavier than space itself. Captain Valen's claws dug into his armrests, his yellow eyes frozen on the screen. The human warship had noticed them. It was impossible. The Vectra was equipped with the most advanced stealth technology in the Xelorian fleet. No one, not even the Grath, had ever detected them at this distance. And yet, U.S. Titanfall, the unstoppable human warship, had just turned toward them like a predator locking onto prey. "Captain," the officer's voice was barely above a whisper. "It knows we are here." Valen's throat went dry. The Titanfall moved with unnatural grace, its enormous structure barely making a sound as it glided through the void. It was unlike any warship Valen had ever seen. No exposed turrets, no weak points, no visible engines. It looked less like a machine and more like a living nightmare, a shadow of destruction that had taken form. Then the ship spoke. Not through sound, not through radio waves. Directly into their minds. "You do not belong here." The words were cold, empty, as if spoken by a god who had long stopped caring for lesser beings. Valen shuddered. "This is Captain Valen of the Xelorian High Fleet. We are not your enemies." No response. Only silence. Then the Titanfall moved. 1 second, it was thousands of kilometers away. The next, it was right in front of them. A ship that size should not be able to move that fast. It should not be possible. The crew panicked. "Captain, it's right on top of us. Shields up. Full power to engines. Get us out of here now." Valen gritted his teeth. He had fought many battles. He had stared death in the face before. But never like this. He had to make a choice. If he ran, would the Titanfall chase them? Would it see them as a threat? Would it erase them from existence with the same godlike precision it had used against the Grath? Or was it waiting, watching, testing them? The sensors flickered again. A new signal appeared. Valen's blood turned to ice. Hundreds of human warships were arriving. No, not just warships. Ghost ships. Their signatures were unreadable, their weapons unknown. But they were everywhere. The humans had not just returned. They had prepared for war. The Titanfall's voice echoed once more, cold and final. "Leave. Now." Valen didn't hesitate. "Full retreat. Get us out of here." The Vectra spun sharply, its engines roaring as it jumped into hyperspace. But even as the stars stretched and blurred, Valen knew one thing. The galaxy had just changed forever, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first strike. The Vectra burst out of hyperspace, its hull trembling from the stress of the emergency jump. The crew gasped for breath, their minds still reeling from what they had just witnessed. Captain Valen slumped back in his chair. He had seen countless battles, had fought alongside warlords and emperors, but nothing had ever made him feel so powerless. The Titanfall was not just a warship. It was a message, and Valen understood it loud and clear. Humanity had returned, and they were no longer the weaklings of old. A cold voice cut through the tense silence. "Captain." Valen turned to see his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sek, standing stiffly at the control station. His pale blue skin looked almost gray with fear. "A High Council demands an immediate report," Sek said, his voice shaking. "They intercepted our distress signal." Of course they did. The Xelorian High Council never missed a chance to interfere. Valen exhaled sharply. How could he even explain what he had just seen? Before he could respond, the ship's warning alarms screamed. "Incoming Distoriss Saigeneo. Priority aid alert." Valen's eyes snapped to the screen. It wasn't from a Xelorian ship. It wasn't even from a known ally. It was from the Grath Empire. The mighty Grath, the most feared species in the galaxy, were begging for help. Valen's hands curled into fists. He had no love for the Grath. They had once waged war against his people, but what could possibly make the Grath send a distress call? Sek played the transmission. A holographic image flickered to life. A Grath general, blood dripping from his forehead, eyes wide with terror. Explosions raged in the background. "This is General Karu of the Grath High Command. Our fleets are being annihilated." The humans. A massive explosion rocked the screen. A shadow fell over the Grath general. Something loomed behind him. The Titanfall. The video cut to static. Silence filled the command deck. Valen's throat went dry. "The humans," Sek whispered. "They're attacking the Grath homeworld." Valen swallowed hard. It was unthinkable. The Grath were the dominant force in the galaxy. Their fleets spanned thousands of systems. They had ruled with an iron fist for centuries. And yet, the humans had decided to wage war against them. Not with numbers. Not with diplomacy. With a single warship. Valen turned to his crew, his voice barely above a whisper. "Prepare a second jump. We're going to the Grath homeworld." Sek's eyes widened in horror. "Captain, that's suicide." If the Titanfall sees us, we need to know what we're dealing with. Valen snapped. We need to see it for ourselves. The Vectra shuddered as the engines roared to life. And for the first time in his life, Captain Valen felt true fear. Because he knew, deep in his bones, that the war had already been decided, and humanity was going to win. The unstoppable force. The Vectra dropped out of hyperspace above the Grath homeworld, and instantly, Captain Valen knew he had made a mistake. The planet was burning. Massive columns of black smoke rose from the once mighty capital cities. Fires raged across continents. Entire sections of the planet's defense grid lay in ruins, their debris scattered across orbit. But it wasn't just the destruction that made Valen's blood run cold. It was how fast it had happened. The Grath Empire had ruled for hundreds of years. They had the largest fleet, the deadliest warriors, and the most advanced fortifications in the galaxy. They had crushed dozens of species without a second thought. And yet, in a matter of hours, they had been reduced to this. Valen's claws gripped the armrests of his chair. What kind of power was this? Captain. Shek's voice trembled as he pointed at the sensor screen. Valen followed his gaze. And there it was. U.S. Titanfall. It hung in the void above the burning planet, its hull gleaming like a shadow forged from nightmares. It was motionless, silent, as if it was admiring its own handiwork. And then it moved. Not toward them. Not toward anything in particular. It simply turned, like a predator looking for its next meal. Then, without warning, the Titanfall vanished. 1 second, it was there. The next, it was gone. No warp signature, no energy distortion, no trace. Just gone. The bridge of the Vectra was deathly silent. Shek swallowed. Captain, where did it go? Valen didn't answer, because deep in his heart, he already knew. It hadn't fled. It hadn't retreated. It was hunting. And the Grath Empire had just become its first victim. A transmission crackled through the speakers, breaking the silence. It was the Grath Emperor. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. Silurian vessel, do you see now? Valen hesitated. See what? The Emperor's bitter laugh echoed through the bridge. See what we never did. That humanity was never weak. They were never fragile. A long pause. Then the Emperor spoke the words that sent chills down Valen's spine. They were just waiting. The transmission cut off. Valen exhaled shakily, his mind racing. The humans had vanished for over a century. No one knew what had happened to them. Some thought they had gone extinct. Some thought they had fled. But now, the truth was terrifyingly clear. They had been preparing. The Titanfall was just the beginning. And now, the galaxy belonged to them. The Empire trembles. The silence on the Vectra was suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. The crew sat frozen, their gazes locked on the burning wreckage of the Grath homeworld. The empire that had once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist was no more. Valen tried to steady his breathing. His heart pounded like war drums in his chest. This was not war. This was something else. Captain, Shek whispered, breaking the silence. What do we do? Valen had no answer. Then the distress signals began. Hundreds of them. Not just from the Grath, from everywhere. Shek's fingers danced over the control panel, pulling up the transmissions. Holograms flickered to life, displaying panicked alien commanders from across the galaxy. Our fleets are vanishing. The humans. Titanfall just appeared in our system. It destroyed our orbital defenses in seconds. We surrender. We surrender. Just let us. Static. Every message ended the same way. Silence. Valen gritted his teeth. This was not an invasion. This was eradication. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were surgically removing threats from the galaxy, one empire at a time. Then the sensors screamed. Incoming hyperspace signatories. Valen's blood ran cold. How many? Sek stared at the data feed. His hands trembled. Too many. A second later, the darkness of space rippled. And they arrived. Not one. Not 10. Not 100. Thousands. Titanfall had been just the beginning. Now, an entire fleet of human warships emerged from the void, each one a towering colossus of black metal and shifting energy. Every single one of them was a Titanfall. The bridge of the Vectra became a tomb. Sek's voice was barely a whisper. Captain, they were holding back. Valen clenched his fists. Humanity hadn't come to win a war. They had come to end it. And there was nothing left to stop them. The final battle. The Vectra remained motionless in the dark abyss of space, surrounded by the silent wreckage of what was once the mighty Grath Empire. But now something far worse loomed before them. Thousands of Titanfalls. Each warship, a towering behemoth of shifting black metal, pulsed with an eerie blue energy. No markings, no insignia, just cold, unstoppable destruction. Valen had spent his life studying war. He had memorized the fleet formations of every empire. He knew battle tactics that had won wars before they even began. But this was not war. This was execution. Sek's hands hovered over the controls. His voice barely held together. Captain, do we run? Valen stared at the sensor screen. The Titanfall fleet had made no move toward them. They had wiped out the Grath, yet the Vectra still floated untouched. No response, no weapons locked on. They were waiting. But for what? A sudden burst of light erupted from the human fleet. A single Grath dreadnought, one of the last survivors, had opened fire. Plasma cannons, railguns, and hypermissiles, all unleashed in one desperate final stand. The human ships didn't move. They didn't evade. They didn't need to. The weapons passed right through them. Valen's mind froze. The human ships weren't solid. They flickered like ghosts. The Grath dreadnought's weapons did nothing, as if the Titanfalls weren't even there. Then reality shifted. One of the Titanfall warships faded back into existence. It unleashed a single pulse of white-hot energy. The Grath dreadnought simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just gone. Sek whispered what they were all thinking. They aren't just ships. There's something else. Valen gritted his teeth, something beyond us. His claws tightened around the armrests of his chair. He had spent his life believing that the Xilorians were survivors, that they understood power, that they could outthink any enemy. But how do you outthink something you don't understand? The main screen flickered. A message appeared, written in that same alien script as before. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was an offer. Kneel, or be erased. The bridge of the Vectra fell silent. The crew looked at Valen. Their fate was in his hands. He had one choice: kneel or resist and become the next lesson. Valen took a slow breath. He had once thought the Grath were the greatest monsters in the galaxy, but now he realized the truth. The real monsters had just arrived, and they were human. The end of the Grath Empire. Captain Valen's claws dug into his armrests. His heart pounded like a war drum. The message on the screen burned into his mind. Kneel or be erased. A choice, yet not truly a choice at all. The bridge of the Vectra remained deathly silent. Every officer, every crew member, sat frozen in their seats, their eyes locked on him. They were waiting for him to decide their fate. Sek swallowed hard. His voice was barely above a whisper. Captain, what do we do? Valen didn't answer. Not yet. His gaze remained locked on the Titanfall fleet, on the thousands of warships floating in perfect formation. No heat signatures, no transmissions, no life signs. They were silent ghosts, machines of war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not just ships, something more, something worse. The Grath had ruled the stars for centuries. They had burned worlds, enslaved entire species, crushed rebellions before they could even begin. And now, the mighty Grath Empire no longer existed. The capital world was a graveyard, not conquered, erased. A lump formed in Valen's throat. This was no war. This was a cleansing. The humans had returned not for territory, not for diplomacy. They had come to reset the balance of power. A sudden tremor shook the Vectra. The Titanfall fleet was moving. Sek gasped. They're locking onto us. Shields up. Evasive maneuvers. Valen barked. The crew scrambled. The ship's engines roared to life. The Vectra turned sharply, preparing for an emergency jump. But it was useless. The moment they tried to flee, the stars disappeared. The Titanfall fleet had deployed a gravity net, an invisible field that swallowed all motion, trapping them in place. They were caught. Valen's breathing grew shallow. This is it. This is how we die. But then, the Titanfall's main screen flickered. A single holographic figure appeared. A human. Tall, expressionless, clad in a sleek black uniform. No medals, no insignia. A ghost in human form. The figure spoke, its voice calm. Cold. You have seen enough. Valen forced himself to speak. What? What do you want? The human didn't blink. Your answer. Silence stretched between them. Kneel or be erased. Valen glanced at his crew. These were his people. The best of the Xelorian fleet. Brave warriors. Survivors. And yet, in the face of this, their courage had shattered. He had to make the call. Valen took a slow breath. Then he lowered his head. We submit. Sek's eyes widened. Whispers spread through the bridge. The great Captain Valen had surrendered. But Valen knew the truth. This was not surrender. This was survival. The human figure nodded once. Then the Titanfall fleet simply vanished. No flash of light. No hyperspace jump. Gone. The gravity net released them. The Vectra drifted free once more. The stars returned. Valen exhaled slowly. It was over. For now. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. The humans had sent a warning today. A demonstration. And the rest of the galaxy would soon face the same choice. Kneel or be erased. Epilogue. A new galaxy. Across the stars, the old empires trembled. The Grath were gone. Their fleets silenced. Their worlds empty. The remaining galactic powers gathered in secret. The Xelorians. The Varkari. The Keltan Dominion. For the first time in history, former enemies sat together at the same table. Because they all knew the truth. The old wars no longer mattered. The humans had returned. And now, the galaxy belonged to them.